With a nearly 40-year career, I've had the privilege of consulting with many CEOs, owners, and entrepreneurs. My roles with organizations have been diverse, from reporting to CEOs to being an integral part of the executive team. The breadth of experience has enabled me to work and consult with leaders at all levels of an organization. Despite time, the issues and concerns I encountered persist in today's workforce and the perspectives of CEOs and executive teams. The question that remains is, why? And more importantly, what can we do about it now? After conducting hundreds of interviews with leaders and employees and embarking on an exhaustive literature review over 6 years, I stumbled upon a surprising revelation. Despite the passage of my 18-year retirement, the paradigm we use to define leadership and consequently CEOs and executives has remained unchanged. The unexpected finding initially caught me off guard. However, it all made sense after I delved into my interview data and literature review results. When you combine data and articles created over decades by reputable search firms like Gallup, Pew, McKinsey, and Harvard Business Journals, and compare the data against the actual conversations you had with executives, leaders, and employees, and find a high correlation, you validate the research. The validation process is crucial in understanding the root causes of communication issues in leadership. It validates the study I did and provides a deeper understanding of the issues enlightening us all. Communication is still a barrier to leadership and culture, strategic planning, and overall performance. You can scroll through today's social media and find all types of problems that, when you dig deeper, have the lack of communication at the core of the problem. Many solutions offered in leadership development, such as emotional intelligence, depend on effective communication. Most people take communication for granted. And of course, emotional intelligence is useless except for yourself unless you use interpersonal communication as a means of interacting with someone or even many people. People wrongfully assume that since they can talk and hear, they're communicating effectively. I conducted interviews of leadership and cultural assessments as a leader and as a consultant. Some involved individual leaders and others involved teams, yet others assessed the whole organization, many of which involved international corporations. Having spent 8 years in universities studying communication, it was clear to me that the vast majority of leadership in companies viewed communication as an assumed capability, and little to no education was being conducted to improve communication and identify why communication was seen as a barrier contributing to low engagement, poor performance, and misinformation leading to poor results for the organization. It's high time we recognize the need for informal, interpersonal communication development in leadership and take urgent steps to address this critical issue. In the first few years of my consulting, I asked 3 basic open-ended questions during focus groups to validate assessments. One of those questions was, what one thing would you like your leader to do better? Over 80% of the responses I received over 40 years of assessments were communication. When I asked further pin-down questions to understand better what they meant, their answers pointed squarely to interpersonal communication. For example, not interacting with other employees, frequency of communicating, and unclear messages. Often the way communication was delivered was poorly received. For example, usually employees refer to nonverbal incongruity with verbal messages, where the leader's behavior didn't seem to align with what the leader's verbal message was saying. Messages came across as insincere. Nonverbal communication has several components most people don't consider, such as timing. Is the discussion scheduled to consider the employee? Other times, the tone and pitch didn't meet the message urgency. How close the leader was to the employee while talking sometimes created a threatening environment the employee felt they had no control over. These are just a few examples of interpersonal communication leaders were unaware they were making because they had no formal communication development anywhere in their life experience. This lack of communication development is a critical issue that leadership must urgently address. Today, one of the most prominent mistakes CEOs and executives make is to isolate themselves and minimize communication within the organization. The isolation significantly impacts organizational communication, leading to a cascade of issues. Information overload begins when small businesses scale and start becoming larger. When companies add layers of people to the organization, CEOs isolate themselves to minimize the number of interruptions they have. Depending on the CEO, you will find some CEOs restrict communications because of information overload. They can interrupt such tasks as growing the business, interacting with stakeholders, and civic community responsibility, to name a few of the CEO's job descriptions. Increased employees lead to information overload, which leads to leadership roles in hierarchically structured organizations. Most organizations view leadership as a connecting role that passes communication from the organization's top to all the levels. Executives have specific messages they want to be communicated precisely as stated. And other communication, they delegate what and how to communicate directions to employees. Of course, CEOs don't consider the leader's message design and delivery competency. For example, you might have played a game where you lined up with 10 other children. The teacher whispered a message to the first child, who then passed that message on to the next until the message was related to the last child. More often than not, what the first child states was vastly different from what the last child described. The reason for the difference might lie in the complication of the message, one or more children simply not listening well, or cultural language differences among the children. Now consider whether executives consider any of these barriers to messages being delivered correctly when the executives pass on information to share with employees through leaders. On the top of the incorrect message, the executives have isolated themselves from the organization, so they have no idea the message they sent through leaders was communicated correctly until something goes wrong. On top of the incorrect message, the executives have isolated themselves from the organization, so they have no idea the message they sent through leaders was communicated correctly until something goes wrong. This isolation gravely impacts the organization's communication, which must be addressed urgently. Most leaders, executives, and employees know how poor communication impacts organizational effectiveness. Outside of some courses like active listening and feedback, very few leaders receive a significant amount of interpersonal communication courses. Courses that cover the impact of message design, the various methods for delivering communication, and the effect of the quality of interpersonal communication are not found in most internal or external leadership courses. Most people will answer yes if you ask if they feel they communicate. When you ask them how much time they will spend designing the message they will send to someone, how their nonverbal and verbal cues might impact the message, or what internal and external barriers might affect the message. They're lost for words. I once contracted to help a friend with a restaurant business. It was a single restaurant in a medium-sized community near a university. The restaurant had been open for about 10 years and did reasonable business. Still, the owner was beginning to see a slight decline, and his business had increased each year for 10 years. He had a customer service questionnaire that customers completed after each meal, and he was noticing fewer positive comments or no responses. He saw his sales leveling off, but his profit percentage was about the same year to year, so his control, his operation was under control. For most of the decade, he had reservations that filled the restaurant. There was no significant competition that had opened near him, and the indicators were causing him to worry. 8 years into the business, he opened a catering service. He was seeing the same troubling trends in his catering business. He had the same chef he opened the company with all this time. His employees were seasonal based and mostly hired students, many of which wanted to remain through the summer. His employees made excellent wages. His partner, later becoming his wife, managed the front of the house and had a wonderful rapport with the employees and the customers. His menu was American but unique and changed regularly, except for some customer favorites. In his 8 years, he still maintained a high food and beverage quality with an excellent wine cellar. His desserts were what his customers raved about in the community. The restaurant became known throughout the state because of its desserts. The restaurant was listed in the upper price range in the restaurant listings compared to other restaurants in the state. Employees bragged about working in his restaurant. The owner was never at a loss for quality employees. Spent a lot of time with employees and customers, ensuring high standard of service and quality food. His operating costs were excellent. He and his wife were baffled about the leveling off of the business. I have a standard consulting model. I always begin by assessing the organization, regardless of the size, including culture and leadership. It usually is a 360-degree assessment and can include people external to the business, including customers, depending on the situation. That was the case for this restaurant. Customers were included. I did an assessment. In addition, I spent time interviewing employees, management, and customers of both restaurant and the catering business. I observed the restaurant during business hours. I accompanied the catering team to events. All of this over several weeks. The owner was worried there was something wrong on the operations side of the business. He was concerned he might need to relocate the business or upgrade the restaurant, all very costly solutions. I asked him to schedule a dinner with him, his wife, the chef, and the restaurant management. I told him I would review the data with him and his team over dinner. They were nervous and anxious to get down to business. We poured some wine and set up a screen and a computer to interface that I could show them the results. He was slightly surprised when I said I would need the equipment. I then started to explain. I started by asking him and his partner, now his wife, when they decided to jump in and start the business. I was taken back somewhat, but soon both of them passionately described their conversation in a restaurant. The owner explained how he loved eating out, how he began talking about what he would do to enhance his eating experience. The owner would have a restaurant that would seem different, a restaurant everyone could associate with the community. It would be a hallmark. He knew of a building surrounded by trees near the university campus and on the central street leading to the football stadium. He knew this was a great location, but would have limited seating. So he bought the building and remodeled it into a small restaurant with a luxurious ambiance and would use students to staff the restaurant. Initially, he managed the restaurant alone, was in the restaurant every day, talking with customers and even serving excellent food to customers if necessary. He took the time to chat at the table with the customers. Customers got to know him and they felt special. He and the chef would seek input from customers about what they liked, didn't like, and what they would like to see improved. So customers felt special and offered advice, and the owner took and implemented it in the restaurant. He named the restaurant Saga. The definition of saga is similar to a myth, something representing bigger than life and told over time by many others in story format to be remembered over time and shared with others by word of mouth, usually with a story attached, like, this is where my wife and I had our first date, and we have had our anniversary dinners here ever since. The name fits this restaurant well because it became well known as a place to dine and become associated with pleasurable dining, deal making, and a place to bring those you wish to impress. I've changed the name of the restaurant to protect my client's confidentiality, but the description I provided fits the restaurant like a glove. Sure, you would find the name of the restaurant in the synonyms for saga. The research showed when the owner and the wife began the catering business, the owner's presence was not as prominent in the restaurant. The manager they hired wasn't spending time with the customers and did not understand how the owner's discussions impacted the customers' impressions of the business. The new manager didn't have the natural sense of emotional intelligence the owner had. Instead of asking how customers felt about the meal, the manager asked the questions directly, almost interrogating the customers. The owner was a natural communicator, but didn't know how to teach interpersonal communication. To the customer, the restaurant was turning into every other restaurant they've been to. The food was great. It was the ambiance they were missing. It was a personal touch that turned the restaurant into a fable. The owner had become focused on running two businesses, taking the time away from the restaurant customers. He became engrossed at spending time speaking to community groups, and he'd actually set aside a portion of the restaurant where organization could schedule meetings in his restaurant in the meeting room, and the room was continually booked. The owner had lost sight of the purpose that drove his initial business success and got bogged down in the operational side of the business. He didn't spend as much time with customers. He delegated too much too fast to a manager he didn't spend time with to develop the emotional intelligence needed to relate to the customers. It was a combination of the owner's natural emotional intelligence and strong interpersonal communication skills that impacted customers and turned his restaurant into a legend. The restaurant wasn't your everyday restaurant chain dining establishment. It was a unique and special restaurant. The restaurant was where you took your girlfriend to eat and impress her, or your business client to impress them. The story captivated the management of both the catering and the restaurant. When I asked the team if they noticed anything about the information we presented, they instantly realized the problem. As the owner scaled the business, he did not spend time with the management and the staff instilling in them the ability to relate to customers, the magical feelings associated with dining at Saga. With some guidance, they created a plan to seek employees with valuable interpersonal communication skills as waiters. The restaurant management saw their strengths and weaknesses in interpersonal communication and emotional intelligence. They started working on the plan. The good news is the chef also had these natural communication and emotional intelligence skills during the process and remained with the restaurant the whole time. This allowed the owner time to train his management employees on interpersonal communication and emotional intelligence skills. Because, like all good chefs, they go out and talk with people to make sure their food is appreciated. This made the employees feel special, and the owner explained the restaurant's purpose in every interview that he did. For the customers to see the restaurant as a saga, to relate to everyone else they met. The owner made hiring all management employees one of his responsibilities. Saga still exists and is a saga in a few more communities. The owner's success was due to his insights, dedication to high quality food, love of his community interaction, and strong interpersonal communication skills, which allowed his natural high emotional intelligence to win the hearts and minds of his customers. The owner's original purpose of creating a restaurant that meant more than dining out, that would become a saga passed down over time, allowed him to grow through mostly word of mouth. It was also an excellent location pick. The owner did not understand how vital his emotional intelligence and effective impersonal communication were to his business. A lack of understanding of interpersonal communication is not unusual and is essential in business. Interpersonal communication is not something we teach to the extent necessary in businesses or universities and even high school. Once the restaurant owner understood that his natural talents were not a norm for others, it took very little to establish a mentoring program for his management and employees. We created a hiring interview, behaviorally based format that helped the owner and his management hire servers and greet staff with high emotional intelligence level and good interpersonal communication skills. The behavioral change was done with a few behavioral interview design questions. Employees were getting daily feedback on performance from a customer feedback card program delivered in a confidential envelope and presented during payment. It was kind of unique. The customer was asked to complete the form, put it in the envelope, and seal it. The wait person's name was on each card with a thank you and a handwritten signature. Customer feedback cards were collected and provided to the wait staff at the end of each shift for them to review before they left. The owner and management then would review the previous day's overall performance before the next shift and discuss what they needed to do to improve and sustain what they did well. For years, there was no formal performance system in place. Behavioral assessment is something I recommended instead of an annual performance review. I termed this concept behavioral assessment. It is done daily and is highly team focused. The combination of looking for good interpersonal communication skills and a sense of emotional intelligence in behavioral interview format, implementing a confidential personalized feedback card that the customer sealed, and implementing a behavior assessment model to improve performance did the trick. Some 20 plus years later, Saga still exists and enjoys strong community relationships in all the existing communities. Again, the name of the restaurant was changed to protect client privacy. Although this is a small business, this concepts apply to everybody. When the original purpose of the organization is lost and the executive leaderships get tied up in operational and growth priorities, can have measurable impact on the business regardless of the size of the business. One of the first things that stands out is a lack of effective interpersonal communication. Executives begin to rely heavily on leadership as their nervous system that ensures the vision, the mission, the goals, and the objectives and strategies are converted into roles, resources, and activities that deliver the purpose of the organization. But most of the time, they do this without educating leadership about the three components of Renaissance leadership: interpersonal communication, a psychological leadership profile, and the ability to apply emotional intelligence, which also focuses organizations to seek leadership outside the organization. Hiring externally usually causes morale and satisfaction problems among existing employees. Outside leadership means you are placing leaders in position without years of cultural knowledge about the company. Lack of cultural knowledge means leaders hired from the outside won't have a sense of the company's purpose and culture, and it will take a lot of time for them to adjust. On top of this, most leaders have had virtually no comprehensive interpersonal communication development. They could easily lack the communication skills that executives desperately need to relate from the bottom to the top of the organization. In his book, Renaissance Leadership Odyssey, Victor L. Vogel, 2024, refers to leadership and effectiveness and recommends a leadership paradigm change. Victor emphasizes three essential pillars for improving leadership role and effectiveness in organizations. First, interpersonal communication effectiveness is the base of the three pillars. It is crucial for the effectiveness of all leaders from the top to the bottom of the organization. Secondly, it is something we have missed for the last 4 decades. Businesses and leadership development have not taken the time to help leaders discover their leadership psychological profile. Developing a leadership psychological profile is like leadership therapy. It should be handled by a licensed psychologist or therapist versed in industrial performance psychology on staff within the organization. Leadership therapy is time spent on the personal understanding of who the leader is as a person, starting with their early childhood up to the point where they're considering leadership. It is focused on growing a specific potential leader. From this, the leader is better equipped to assimilate, internalize, and personalize the needed leadership skills. It helps the leader connect authentically, allowing the leader to apply leadership skills as a leader in an organization. Thirdly, the whole essence of leadership is about relationships and connecting with others to build trust and commitment to the leader in the organization. Connecting with others falls in the realm of emotional intelligence. Using practical communication skills and the leader's knowledge about themselves, they learn the emotional intelligence skills necessary to connect in a manner that connects with employees and inspires employees to trust and grant the leader the power to lead them. This trust is based on the leader's ability to sincerely display compassion, competency, consistency, and congruency. It leads to employees perceiving leaders as authentic leaders, leaders they can trust, leaders who they choose to follow. Executive leadership would be required to embrace the new leadership paradigm, which would require changing the organization to optimize the whole organization. An essential organizational change is to bring leadership identification, selection, development, and placement up to the senior leadership level, back under the corporation's control, and for all leadership to be selected and placed from within the company. By placing leadership identification, selection, development, and placement within the organization, including the staff to manage such a change, provides internal growth, ensures cultural awareness, and focuses on the skills and abilities the company needs. Ensures a resource planning model, allowing for the proper leadership to handle acquisitions or other increases in business, and provides the ability for cross-functional development of leadership. Cross-functional leadership becomes critical as you place internal personnel into senior leadership positions and provides for potential internal CEO candidates. These changes lead to the better employee engagement, satisfaction, and commitment to the organization. Leaders who are interested in improving their performance, employee satisfaction, and engagement, and retaining high-quality employees should consider adopting the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey paradigm shift and change the organization to optimize all the organization's leadership and people resources. For questions or to dialogue about the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey leadership change paradigm, you can contact Vic Vogel at the following resources. You can reach me at vicvogel46@gmail.com. On LinkedIn, you can reach me at linkedin.com/in/Victor L. Vogel. https www.victorvogel.com is my website, and my YouTube channel is Building Renaissance Leaders. You can reach me there at www.youtube.com/the Building Renaissance Leaders, all one word. I will leave all these contact points in the description of this podcast. Have a good day. I hope you find this helpful in developing a corporation, an organization that will move into the future and be able to cope with the many changes in our workforce that are taking place today. Until next time, I'm Vic Vogel.